Here we are again. Right, that can be a visual metaphor.
Yeah. For Sione Tuipulotu's injury?
Yeah.
Or for Scotland generally?
I think that is the question, isn't it? So here we go again. It is Scotland's Six Nations. And every year we go in with the best intentions. We think this could be the year that the Evening
Hello,
Geekin
Scotland
book
fans.
finally stands up. And then right as I start speaking, it will fall down. That feels like how Scotland's Six Nations has gone for so long.
Honestly, mate, like the amount of years we've had where we've gone, you know what? It could be Scotland's year, but it's not even like that. It's not even like, I don't know. Every year you see enough promise from Scotland, and I think there is a real frustration amongst not just Scottish fans, but people who are great admirers like we are of Scotland, the way that they've been trying to play it in, let's face it, the Finn Russell era.
Yeah.
And yet, the disheartening thing is, not like the noughties thing where it's like, oh, we're still shit.
Yeah.
It is instead, it's the opposite. It's like, we've been good for so long now and we've still not won anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Scotland haven't even had a year where they were going into the final weekend like, this could be our year and we could win it. Yeah. It's not like they've had the chance to bomb out at the last stage or the pressure's got to them or anything. Every year they've gone in and people have said, and again, I've spoken to people this year, you've spoken to people that go, I think this is finally Scotland's year. I think this is the year they do it. And I've had those thoughts before. 2021, I was totally on board and I thought that was it. I thought this is finally the year they're mature enough, the team is kicked on enough, this is it. And in the last few years since, I've had that to an extent, and I've kind of had the feeling of like, I can see Scotland winning it this year. And this year feels strange because it's the first year I'm going like, they are capable. Their squad is good enough, their team is good enough. And obviously there's a couple of injuries, but broadly I think they have enough depth to get round that. I think they're well coached, I think they're together, I think they're a well-balanced team, they're experienced, they've been around the block, they know what they're doing. However, there's a bit of me that just goes, we've been here before too many times. Yeah. And you go, well, how do you even talk about the Scotland team? How do you prep them? What do we do? Because they've been in the same place for so long.
And maybe that is the crux of it.
Yeah.
You know, that everybody will go into Scotland going like, well, we know exactly how to beat them because everybody now, including Italy, in the Six Nations has beaten Scotland before, this Scotland team before. Yeah. Everybody has the recipe of how they need to do it.
I mean, England barely remember it.
That is very true, actually. England kind of the exception. They've only beat them once since 2018, which is pretty wild. But most teams will know how they're meant to do it.
Yeah.
But might they get caught off guard by that? It's really hard to tell. Like, I think Scotland have at least one or two huge wins in them. Yeah. And I think they will get those. Do I think they're going to win the tournament? I just, at this moment in time, I really wish I could say yes.
Yeah. But this is the tricky thing. And I think the best way to maybe look at this, right, is we split this into two worlds, right? One is the world in which Scotland go on and win the Six Nations from here. And one is the world in which they do the thing they always do and they fall over and things don't work out as they should. But there is promise and there are some big wins along the way.
Sure.
Right? What does the world where Scotland go on and win the Six Nations look like beyond things actually working and the train fares coming down in price and inflation dropping and suddenly there are pigs who can fly and the dinosaurs are back? What beyond like the magical elements of that world, what does it look like?
Yeah.
From a Scottish point of view, from a Scottish rugby point of view.
Probably looks like Sione Tuipulotu coming back very early from his injury. Yeah. Stuart Hogg apologises, comes back in his world class.
Yeah.
And peak form Dan Parks comes in, slots in at 12. He's jacked now.
I'll disagree with you on a lot of that because I think Blair Kinghorn is quickly becoming a better player than Hogg ever was.
I agree.
And the form he's been in for Toulouse is exceptional.
Yeah.
I think he has that kind of like, I think he is world class these days.
He didn't hang about. As soon as Hogg announced his retirement, Kinghorn was like, great, I'm going to be world class now. Thank you for waiting for me. This is now my turn. And I think the one real positive, it's not a positive to this, but like with Sione being ruled out injured, and I don't want this to all be about Sione, you know, I don't want it all to be the guy who's not there as opposed to who is there, right? But in terms of what Sione brings to Scotland is he's a brilliant playmaker. He's a world-class ball carrier. And I think the best part of his game is the subtleties, the little touches on the ball, and his dummy lines are as good as any centre in the world. You know, we discussed this before, that him and Chocobares being the two best 12s in the world largely comes down to that. The fact that they defensively are the best organisers and that they run the best dummy lines. And they are the most subtle on the ball in terms of who they're going to give it to when somebody's coming out the back of them and so on, that they organise attacks really, really well. Now, with Sione Tuipulotu being ruled out of that, in comes presumably Stafford McDowell
Most
into
likely
12.
Stafford McDowell, yeah.
But the good thing is he can deal with probably half of the Tuipulotu game. Not to the same standard, because nobody can go up to that standard, but in terms of carrying the ball, defensive organisation, he's absolutely class at that.
I don't think we're going to notice Sione Tuipulotu is injured. I think that obviously Tuipulotu is a better player and they will miss him and things will come down in level.
I think we'll notice that the Tuipulotu's not there.
Maybe, but I think the thing is, I think Stafford McDowell is an exceptional player.
He's brilliant.
And I think he's vastly underrated. He's only got 8 caps under his belt, but he's played hundreds of games for Glasgow in the URC and Europe and is so well-rounded as a player. You know, the obvious factor to him is he's an enormous, enormous guy and he carries the ball hard. He's a more disposable carry than Tuipulotu. Like, Tuipulotu likes to kind of fight to stay in contact and he's very much thinking about offloads and thinking about keeping the ball alive and playing next phase. Stafford McDowell is more like your classic crash ball 12, you know, when he carries in. However, he has an all-round game. He has a distribution game. He's so good at slotting into the boot and throwing long passes. Like, he runs his element in that Tuipulotu triangle, as we always call it, really, really nicely. There's some clips, if you go and look at Glasgow, particularly last season, of him coming in, kind of sliding out from that first receiver into that 13 role they do so well, and chucking long balls over the top. And also, he's got that kind of carrying and distribution element to his game. Like, he's so well-rounded as a centre. And I think we will probably come through their first couple of games going, oh, I completely forgot Tuipulotu was injured. Despite him being, on form, one of the 2 best 12s in the world.
McDowell won't have any trouble stepping up, for sure. And as I say, look, you mentioned the carrying part. For me, I think the best part of his game is how he organises in defence. It is that he calls the line brilliantly. Glasgow puts so much of their defensive leadership on him. Despite the fact that he's in theory second choice for them. But
this is the thing, right? That in theory, you think their first choice is Tuipulotu and Jones because they start for Scotland. And yet, those two only played, I think, 3 games together for Glasgow all season last year. Because
you think of the Glasgow midfield
played every week.
Tom Jordan, Stafford McDowell, and probably Hugh Jones, but it could really be whoever. Even Tuipulotu might be there in that extra channel. But he leads the line brilliantly, and I think from there, that is a real positive, that they have somebody who really does lead the line, that's his biggest strength. But I do think, as much as you're still losing a man from this regardless, a lot of the secondary distribution will be covered by Blair Kinghorn. I think that he's going to be the guy who comes in and plays like as that 12 in attack when it comes to playing from wide to wide, as Scotland really like to do. They're a really interesting team to watch because their whole with the ball game is just about finding space, right? Whether it is, you know, if maybe have 1 or 2 short carries and then we're going wide, we're not interested in hanging about this. When they're kicking, it's always to find grass. They don't very often kick contestably, especially not off 10. You know, they might do it off 9 a little bit. We'll get onto that later.
There was an increased amount over the autumn of them kicking off 9 because they kicked very little. If you go back to last year's Six Nations, there was very little kicking off 9 compared to most other teams.
And we'll cover this later in a bit more depth. But with the attacking game, they really, really like playing off 10 and just having somebody in that boot position off 10. And Blair Kinghorn, when there's no Sione to run that for him, is the absolute perfect man to step into that role. I want to look at this passage against Australia, which leads to a try for Duan van der Merwe. So it comes from a goal line dropout for Australia. Matt Fagerson carries the ball on first phase, gets a really good carry over here, gets him on the front foot straight away. And Scotland work infield. Hugh Jones has a carry, and Blair Kinghorn thinks about committing this breakdown. And then straight away goes, nope, it's sourced. Where else can I join this attack? Where else can I add something to this attack? And he works really, really hard to just find another boot to get into. He's working laterally, he's working backwards here, because Finn Russell's already got the first phase sorted, and he gets into a boot. He doesn't end up getting the ball, but it's fine because he's near to the next breakdown, and he can straight away organise the next attack to come off him, or to go through Finn if necessary. It's a really, really good option to have. Jamie Ritchie, very cutely here, holds Andrew Kellaway off the ball. And it opens up a little bit of a gap on the short side. So Ben White goes, yeah, I'll just give it to his opposite number then. And passes to Duan van der Merwe, makes a nice little break up the touchline. They go another phase. And when Finn Russell carries the ball here, Blair Kinghorn just seamlessly steps into 10. And again, here's another bit of that subtlety that we'll miss from Tuipulotu here. His line here is so unselfish that he's just about deep enough that Kinghorn can miss him, but he's tight enough that he's still engaging Joseph Suaalii, and that is the only thing that Suaalii can realistically mark. He can't drift off here. He tightens that Australia defence. And another thing that Scotland love to do is just give Hugh Jones, Darcy Graham these 1v1s, because they will always get over the gain line in these. They will always do something, get a tackle bust, get an offload. They go for 2 more carries in field just to shorten the defensive line a little bit for Australia. And at this point, they once again have Finn Russell in as first receiver and Blair Kinghorn in as the second receiver. And Russell really quickly ships it onto Kinghorn, and Kinghorn takes it up to the line just 2 or 3 steps at full pelt, and then knows all I need to do is give it to Dylan van der Merwe. Because usually here, with a slightly shortened line, Australia would probably be all right defensively here, but you can't afford to have 2 players half marking Dylan van der Merwe. That is the same as just nobody marking him, you know, because those half tackles literally never get into ground. And so he gives it to Dylan straight away, who finishes the try. And it's a really nice link up here, because obviously Sione Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones play their part in it, but it is using Kinghorn, not even just as an extra centre, but as an extra 10. Having 2 of those on the park potentially could allow Finn Russell to play a little bit wider as well. England do this a lot with Marcus Smith when they have George Furbank coming in as fullback, that the 2 of them essentially play a little bit as left and right 10s every now and then, depending on who's near to the breakdown. If Smith needs to conserve his energy a little bit, he'll go, great, I'll sit a bit deeper, a little bit wider, and I'll have a run with the ball. And Finn Russell is good enough that he can do that. And especially in your own half, that will bring the opposition wingers into the line, create loads of space in behind for how they like to kick.
Yeah, so Scotland are playing a kind of variation on, as everyone is, like, everyone is sort of moving beyond the 1-3-2-2, with the exception of Ireland. Like, Ireland are very stringently, like, sticking to that as a structure. Japan are to an extent. But, like, most teams are starting to move on past that. And Scotland are playing a variation on that kind of Eddie Jones position as rugby idea, where instead of having, though, 1-10 organising everything, they have, as a lot of teams have clocked onto, they have a second guy organising that second wave. Right, so it's often Tuipulotu, or increasingly it's Kinghorn. Like, Kinghorn is increasingly being used as the guy to organise a second wave, whilst Finn is in charge of the overall shape and linking everything up. And so that's something that I think Scotland do miss out on, because McDowell doesn't really run that role for Glasgow. That becomes a bit of an issue, potentially, as that second wave of attack. You put more emphasis on Kinghorn. However, Kinghorn is up to it, but it probably means you've got to play him or Tom Jordan at fullback in order to have those extra options, because Tom Jordan coming in at 15 and allowing Kinghorn to also play that role is a further interesting option. And
or try and use Darcy Graham in that role, I guess, is the other option.
I don't think that fits him at all.
Yeah, I don't think so.
The thing becomes, right, you want these players as well to be playing a role that gets the most out of them, right? So if Dylan van der Merwe was a genius game manager, you wouldn't want to use him as that, because you want him on the wing running into space.
Absolutely.
Like, it would be a waste of his talents, his physical gifts. That becomes a huge element. The other thing I think is worth touching on with Scotland, if we are to stay in this world where they win the Six Nations and they finally, everything clicks, is the other injury. Because Scott Cummings is also at this tournament.
Yeah.
And he's flown under the radar a bit because it was announced on the same day as Tuipulotu. And yet, he has been such a key player for them at line-out time over the last few years.
Nobody's really talked about him as a Lions bolter, which I know we're not doing this, we're doing this as a Six Nations thing. Because he's ruled out, I'm happy to do this. Because he could very easily be the Jeff Parling of this year, where he is as good a line-out caller, a line-out operator, and also an opposition ball. He really is a nuisance. Even if he doesn't steal it, he's really good on the maul defence, on just competing to try and block them from getting a nudge on early. Like, he's such an underrated player at set piece, and by all means a well-renowned scrummager as well. Like, sure, you don't see much of him around the park, but I think he's brilliant.
So this becomes the key thing, I think, if you're to think about Scotland's Six Nations campaign clicking and working perfectly. I don't think the scrum is the focus. They've got a perfectly good scrum, right? Xander Fagerson, really good at not going backwards.
Sure.
And sometimes he gets on top of oppositions, but broadly speaking, he probably, realistically, this Six Nations is not going to dominate the French pack, and he's not going to dominate the Irish pack, and he's probably not going to dominate the English pack. The Welsh pack, everyone will dominate. That's fine. Spaniolo might miss that game
comes
briefly,
back.
So we'll see. That one's up in the air. But their scrum is fine. Their scrum will win their own ball. It won't be under too much pressure, opposition ball, but it's not going to be dominant, right? The area Scotland can go after, though, and it was a bit shaky in the autumn after how solid and really strong it's been for such a long time, is the line-out. And I think if Scotland are to win the Six Nations. Obviously, you want to be winning upwards of 92% of your own line-out ball. Like, successful teams always are in that, like, 92% plus in their line-out ball. That's a given. But if they can start attacking opposition ball, that really gives them, you know, a point of difference.
Yeah.
Because
if they win 91%, they're losing the Six Nations.
Yeah. But, you know, I just think that is like, the line-out feels like the key area they can target because they did have really strong operators there. That's a bit more up in the air. The breakdown has been quite back and forth, that I think Scotland have been quite guilty of picking back rows in order to target opposition ball, and then actually lost quite a lot of their own, been turned over themselves quite a lot because they're picking guys that aren't getting to every breakdown, but are great at choosing which breakdowns to attack from an opposition ball point of view and have high tackle counts. And that isn't a criticism, it's just like it's a priority thing, right? Which is why they kicked so much.
And like
why
a player like, I don't know, like Josh Bayliss is so worth it, you know, for the ground that he does make.
Yeah, that becomes the other point I wanted to talk about, was like the selection in that back row. Because Jack Dempsey came back in, had an exceptional game for Glasgow against Harlequins. I thought he was absolutely phenomenal. However, do you look at him as a carrier? Do you look at, obviously, Matt Fagerson's been on really good form all year.
Yeah.
Was great for Glasgow in that run-in for the URC and should have been mentioned at the end of the Team of the Year nominees.
Sorry.
We forget these all the time. As should George Horn while we're there. George Horn should have come up, but that's fine. Do you stick with Jamie Ritchie, who obviously has real strengths, but doesn't hit as many offensive rucks as some other players? What do you look to do in that back row?
I think you're right about Fagerson. I think he's too good to not pick in terms of he makes an impact both sides of the ball as well. I think I mentioned Josh Bayliss earlier. He's perfect as that number 20 off the bench.
Yeah,
he comes on. The thing is, you could say exactly the same thing about Dempsey. That like a lot of his best games for Scotland have been off the bench.
I think that's what Jack Dempsey's role is.
Yeah.
Is I think I might be tempted to start Josh Bayliss
6-2.
to go. No, I think I would start with Andy Christie out injured.
Yeah.
Who was looking like he was just becoming that player they needed.
Yeah.
And I kind of think Scotland could do with a workhorse bastard at 6, and Bayliss has a real turn of pace to him, but will hit rucks for you.
Yeah.
And you always go him, Fagerson, and then, you know, Darge is co-captain. So
as you say, it is literally an Onyeama Christie injury away from being one of the most competitive back rows in international rugby.
Yeah.
And with him out, it is a little bit more sparse, I think, in terms of you having
I think he's nailed on to 6 at the minute.
Yeah.
I think
because you having to spread a lot of
bolters.
responsibility between Darge and Ritchie at the moment. And I think, that's a little bit of an issue. But they're obviously both excellent players.
I think that back row, they've got lots and lots of options, but they don't have one balanced run, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you'd almost rather have a Kino McCall-Reid or a Lydiate Warburton-Faletau than loads and loads of options that Scotland have. Like, obviously, if you get a couple of injuries, it's much easier to pick from this many options. You've got Jack Mann coming in as the one, like, uncapped, or one of the 2 uncapped players. Also, Fergus Burke in the squad as well. Likely won't see much game time, man. But, you know, if only Alex Mann was in the Wales squad, we could have man versus man in the men's Six Nations.
Fergus Burke's a great option as well because he's been managing games really well at Sarries, has stepped in really nicely, obviously filling Owen Farrell's position. And I think he's been really good in the European games that they've had. I think he's stepped up really well.
And I think he's clearly grown into that role more and more as the season's gone on.
Yeah.
Early days, there was he's come from a very, very different team, a very different environment.
But the partnership he has with the likes of Nick Tompkins, Lucio Cinti in that midfield has been really, really great to watch. But the thing is, I don't know how that's going to translate to Scotland.
Yeah.
Especially when he's competing for the 10 jersey with Finn Russell and Tom Jordan.
Yeah.
That's such a difficult environment to come into and a very different style of play.
This is the thing about Fergus Burke, though, right? Is I think he does suit Scotland's style of play really well. He's an incredibly balanced fly half. And the thing I really like about him is he's always alive, right? He's got such a good knack of never taking contact somehow, you know? He'll drop a pass off at the last available second, then
he's
remain
a proper
in the
system
attack.
10, isn't he?
Yeah. You look at the tries he scored for Saracens this season, right? And how many of them him running support lines, or him popping up on the end and kind of diving over from scrum half and just always being involved still.
And him calling the right move that he happens to be a part of.
And I think that Scotland attack works so well with a membrane type 10, which is what Tom Jordan does really well for Glasgow.
Yeah.
But it's also so built around Finn Russell that you want him above anything else. And so I think Fergus Burke's a really good get for them. You know, there's stories out there that he obviously had contact from England. He had a message from England saying, you're close to the team, so keep yourself English qualified. Don't go and do anything stupid now. And where Gregor Townsend was calling him before he even left New Zealand, was like speaking to him regularly. And he went like, in the end, it was no contest. Like, it was very clear which one I wanted to go for. And I think, I don't know, I would be tempted to give him a go. Italy is the first game up, which is tricky. Obviously, Wales is much deeper in, and that game is in Murrayfield.
You'd feel for Tom Jordan, though, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but I think Tom Jordan's going to be looked at as a fullback option primarily. He's either the number 22 or he's 15.
Then who do you drop out of Kinghorn, Doohan and Darce?
Well, this becomes it, right? That we talked a bit in the kicking video about their wing option and its dilemma, because Scotland are starting to kick more and more off 9, which was not a feature of the game very much over the last few years. They've traditionally kicked long through Finn Russell, but they started to kick more and more off 9 in the autumn. And I think, obviously, they always kick to clear and kick long and whatever, but they've started to look for more contestable bombs. Now that pathway,
because that's really in trend at the moment, is contestable bombs.
Now, Kinghorn is exceptional in the air, but the other option they have is Kyle Steyn,
who is injured.
Yes.
I will add.
Okay. So you probably look at, do you put Kinghorn on that wing in order to allow Tom Jordan to come in at fullback? But then it becomes, you know, Darcy had a knock over Christmas, but will be fit by all accounts. You've got Duan van der Merwe as well. Probably has to start because you can't drop him. But then Darcy Graham isn't an impact player to come off the bench. You want him out there the whole time.
That's such a difficult dilemma, isn't it? Because when Kyle Steyn's back from his injury, he's such a big game player. Yeah. Like, he never goes missing in the big games. You look at particularly the ORC final, he was one of the best players on the park, if not the best player.
Which is hard to do from the wing.
Really non-traditional wing things. It wasn't just that he was out there scoring tries, it was his kick chase. Even if he misses...
His kick chase is exceptional.
Yeah, even if he misses the original contest, he will flatten whoever it is, he will contest the breakdown, he'll win penalties, or he'll just win it in the air in the first place, or get it back. I think his choice of which ones to attack and which one to go for the tackle on is exceptional. Defensively, he's brilliant. His kicking game is so good.
Yeah.
And yet we're talking about somebody who's not even going to play. Because the flip side of that is you're looking at Scotland's first and second top try scorers of all time in Doohan and Darcy. Both of them are bullshit players, which really suit the way Scotland plays. And I think that's largely informs the way Scotland play, is they've got a real good distributing 10, and they've got two players who, if given a one-on-one, will literally score. Like, that is as simple as it is. On the flip side of it, I do think Darcy Graham, I want to quickly look at his kick chase here. Here's one, again, from the Australia game in the autumn. George Horne puts in a fantastic kick here. He puts it inches away from the touchline. Loliseo has to really work his feet in field to gather this ball, and it's close enough that Darcy can get to it. So Darcy Graham flattens Loliseo straight away as soon as he gets the ball. And, of course, emerging from the cupboard under the stairs is Harry Potter coming to protect his housemate. Graham's kick chase is so good that he's beaten Potter to the ball. So
it's still funny.
It is. He's beaten to the snitch, mate.
Yeah.
That was an open goal.
200
right there.
It's an open quaffle. What are the hoops? Whatever.
Whatever they are. Anyway, because Lolaseo's tried so hard to just stay in the field of play, all he can do is just present the ball back straight away, because otherwise he's just in touch. The flag's going straight up. And so Scott Cummings spots this straight away, spots that Potter's not quite on side yet, and just shoves him over, bends down and picks the ball up. And that is just as contestable as kicks get. Even though Darcy Graham's not contested the ball itself, Scott Cummings has followed up really nicely and stolen the ball straight away.
Yeah. And that becomes the question for Scotland, right? And whether we end up in the world where they win the Six Nations or the world where what's happened the last few years happens again, comes down to whether they get the decision right or wrong. Of, do you prioritise Doohan and Darcy, who are so good when you give them space, or do you go, if we put Kinghorn on the wing, or we look at, targeting the aerial game, but also having Tom Jordan in at fullback and allowing us to organise that second wave of attack more? Can we create more space by having a better organised attack, especially out wide? And are we just going to win it down the wing and make these 20-metre blocks of territory at a time anyway, right? Is that of more use than two players who can score when they get into that environment?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that. I doubt Gregor Townsend has a hard idea of the answer to that.
That is it, because it's such a gamble, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they are playing a game plan that relies on space pre-existing on the field.
Yeah.
And defences are so good now that you can't quite rely on that. If it was broken field rugby from sort of 10, 15 years ago, even potentially less than that, Scotland would walk this Six Nations, right? But because you're looking at that French defence, which is so aggressive, the Irish defence, which is so aggressive, the English defence, which is arguably too aggressive, you know? Like, that's such a difficult thing to play around, and you've got to somehow manipulate that, pull somebody out of their regular position from the opposition, and try and create that. And that usually does, you know, the best way of doing it is either by, at the moment, having a completely dominant scrum, which is the Springboks way of doing it, or, and again, this is also the Springboks way of doing it, contestable kicks, you know, which create unstructured environments.
Yeah. I will ask the big question then, before we wrap up.
Oh, God.
Right? If Scotland do bomb out here, right, if this doesn't go according to plan, what do they do next? Ooh. If the same thing happens again, do they go, well, maybe it's next year? Or do they go, we've been doing this for too long, we can't afford to squander this squad of players anymore, and look for a different coach, or look for a different approach at least?
It's a valid question, because you'll ask anybody and they'll tell you that Gregor Townsend is doing a great job.
Gregor Townsend is doing a fantastic job, right? But we can't tell if another coach would come in and have won a Grand Slam with this group, you know, potentially more than one.
And one day, Scotland fans will look back. Finn Russell would have retired, Blair Kinghorn will have retired, Stuart Hogg has retired, Sione Tuipulotu will have retired, and that's just the backs, right? At some point, all of these will have retired, and they might look back at those teams and go, shit, how did we not win a Six Nations? You know? It's like, we as Welsh fans look back at the 2019 team and go like, why did we not win the World Cup, or at least make the final? And that is the issue. It's so hard to know whether Gregor Townsend's squandering this, or he's the person who's responsible for this team being great and being responsible for the bit where we go, well, they should be winning trophies. Do they roll the dice? I like Gregor Townsend too much to answer this question.
This Six Nations is make or break for them, and particularly for him. That if they finish fourth, I think you have to ask serious questions. I think you've got to go, this team is better than that, that squad is better than that, and obviously Sione Tuipulotu is injured, but they've got good cover, they've got good players. You know, they've built this squad. The Glasgow won the URC, so they've got the core of a team who are used to winning competitions and playing big matches and coming out on top. And they have no excuses anymore.
They win the Calcutta Cup every year. Why can't they do that 5 times in a year? You know, not the Calcutta Cup, you know what I mean? Those big games.
Yeah. And if they can't get that performance out every week, you have to at least say, do we need to change backroom staff? Do we have to change something else? What do we look at? Because something will have to change if they don't do it this year. Like, and I don't want that to be a negative message to go in on, because if they finish second, I think the thing is less Scotland winning it and more them still being in the mix at the end. You know, if we get to round 5 and they're still in the mix, and maybe they've got to beat, you know, whoever they've got on Super Saturday, will be France, by 30 plus points. Fine, I think that's still a good Six Nations for Scotland, even if they have like an impossible set of conditions that they don't reach in the end, and they finish second or even third, but they had a shot at it. Like, what Scotland need is to have a shot at winning it on the last day, or at least like that to be shut down on the penultimate weekend. But like, we need Scotland in a fight for longer than they have been, which is generally they bomb out around round 3, where they like have a horrendous loss, where like that. Who was that guy that was like on the wing for Wales, the chip over the top, in Murrayfield?
Rio Dyer, was it?
No, it was before Rio Dyer.
Oh, okay.
He was like a tall lad. He was like...
Oh, must have been Josh Adams. Must have been Josh Adams. Oh, no, a bit of a prick. That's not Josh Adams.
Whoever
I don't
he was.
know. I don't know. I'm ruled out. Look.
Whoever he was, that guy. But like, you have those moments where something slips in 10 minutes and they disappear. That tends to happen around round 2 or 3. They need to get through that and at least into the final round of the contest would be my big point on Scotland this year.
Look, for Scotland fans... And hello, we love you and miss you. But remember, it's not about where you finish in the Six Nations. It is about whether or not Duhan van der Merwe scores 2 tries against England.